great pleasure to be with all of you here in Vancouver and in Toronto. And I've been here since the morning just getting inspired and excited about the possibilities around zero waste solutions. And I wanted us to focus now on circular cities. And so I'm very pleased to be here with two pioneers in the circular city movement. Thank you both for being here. So I'll take a moment now to introduce who's next to me. I have Julia Vole. She's the Government and Cities Network Manager with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and she manages their Circular Cities Network. She also works on a number of projects focused on the field of policy making and material innovation. And before joining the foundation, Julia did similar work with the World Watch Institute and Deloitte, focused on the circular economy and business innovation. So welcome, thank you for being here, Julia. So Wayne, this is Wayne Hubbard from the London Waste and Recycling Board. He's their Chief Operating Officer, and he helps London boroughs increase their recycling rates and accelerate the development of the circular economy. And previously, Wayne was the head of waste policy at the Greater London Authority. So we have another pioneer here. Welcome, Wayne. So as you know, we've got already lots of activity happening on Pigeonhole, and we're going to come to those questions. I was also asked to start us off by looking at a couple of key themes when we think about circular cities. So we'll take a few minutes to do that, and I'll be asking those of Wayne and Julia. So the first is about the scale of the challenge. And we've heard already from the video and also what you were mentioning, both Julia and Wayne, that cities are also not just the nexus of a lot of the challenges, as you were saying, Julia, but they're also going to be where 75% of the world's populations live in 2030. And we know that, 2050, by 2018, no, I'm kidding. We're just kidding, people are just running to cities. No, 75% of our population is going to be there by 2050. And already we're seeing cities struggling with the solid waste challenges, with constrained resources and infrastructure. So today we've heard about textiles, plastics, food, wasted food. We've looked at business innovation. Wayne, what do you think is the potential of circular cities as a concept to get at this scale of change?
One thing that we say is that cities are the engine room of the circular economy. So this is where it's going to happen. The incredible growth that you've just articulated. In 1930, I think something like 70% of the world's population lived rurally. That's turned on its head in 120 years. We've got 2 billion more middle class joining the world's population by 2025 or some such date. So there's an enormous expansion of people who will want and require the same kind of standards that we're used to that currently don't get that. And if that is provided through a linear economy, then that's unsustainable. So cities have the power to be unsustainable in the way that you've said. They're aggregators of material and they spit out waste. They are linear beasts. In London, what we're trying to do is work kind of, like I say, from the inside out. That requires working with businesses and startups to kind of seed circular economy activity out there in the economy to start to, I think of it like, I don't know if anyone ever saw Star Trek: The Next Generation. Right. But they had these things called nanites, and they kind of went about their business, and they were very intelligent, and they started to kind of, I think at one stage they took over the enterprise. Well, that's what we want to do. We want to kind of set these circular economy SMEs and startups into the economy, and they're going to take it over because they have circular advantage. They'll have that circular advantage, and those linear companies, those will be left behind by that disruption.
And was that the motivation for the London Waste and Recycling Board to be like the seeder of those? Because what I really appreciate is the way that you've brought the waste community together in Resource London. You've brought the investment and business innovators together in Advance London. And you've also brought a multi-stakeholder group together in Circular London. You're bringing all this kind of hub work together. Was that the idea from the beginning, or did that start to emerge?
And well, it started to emerge because the question that we were asked back in 2013 was, London is going to grow to have, this is another stat I'm going to throw at you, 11 million people in its boundary by 2030, I think. And how do we accommodate that level of growth through infrastructure? So we were asked, how many new waste infrastructure plants are we required to manage the waste that will inevitably grow with all those new people living in London? And our response was, if we're thinking forward to 2030 or 2050, we should be a bit more imaginative about the solution to that problem. So rather than just say, well, we'll have this much waste, it will require these many incinerators, this much recycling plant, we said, if you have a circular economy, the infrastructure requirement would be very different. Ironically, we reduced the infrastructure requirement to such a level that politically it became kind of not a big issue at that point in time, because politicians, they're like big numbers. We need to build lots of roads or lots of schools or lots of hospitals, and we said, we don't need to build so many waste plants. So they were kind of like, oh, job done. The real work was trying to then work back into the strategic policy formation by saying, well, but you need to embed these circular economy policies within your documents, or you can't have that. And that's really the hard work. So we had that piece going. We have the kind of outer loop stuff around recycling that they're our core audience, the London boroughs. And then I remember going to an Ellen MacArthur Foundation acceleration workshop in Barcelona. It's hard life. And they were talking about businesses. And from a waste management perspective, I was like, why are we talking about business? I don't understand. And then over my exposure to this kind of new world through the foundation, it became absolutely crystal clear that these were going to be the people who delivered on the ground circularity through their economic activity, creating this wonderful double dividend of economic growth and a reduction in resource use and all that implies through their innovative business models. And so we wove that into the picture.
Great.
So it was a journey, is what I'm saying.
Thanks, Wayne. And Juliet, so Ellen MacArthur Foundation first focused on a whole range of topics, including business innovation, as Wayne is just saying. Why cities? Why now?
Well, to echo Wayne's point, the challenges that are coming into cities in the next decades are immense, and they are more than we ever expected to deal with, and they are challenges that nobody had to deal with before. The growing population, the need for infrastructure, the pollution aspect, the climate problems. So in order to be able to address the new problems, new thinking required. And whether we like it or not, because most of us are living in cities, and cities are the power engine behind the global economy, they're going to be there to deal with these problems. But cities also have a couple of things going on for them. The proximity of people and materials and data and products in cities allows to rethink how we view assets and products in cities, and how we manage to leverage how the local economies in cities create an opportunity for scaling up innovation, for scaling up resource-effective solutions very fast and benefit directly into the city's economy. And all of that is also coming on top of the digital revolution that really opens the door for resource innovation that was not possible even 10 years ago. And I can just brief example is if we look at the car sharing schemes in cities. Today, if you want to get a car in London or in Vancouver, in Paris, you have BlaBlaCars, you have Cars to Go, you have lots of other local schemes, and all you need to do is pull up your smartphone and order that car, and it tracks exactly how far you go, and it just charges directly from your bank account, and you don't need to do anything. That was not possible 10 years ago. But if we look 10 years ahead and we put on top of that the aspect of electric vehicles and self-driving cars, which is coming, this is going to happen whether we like it or not. And we can then think about what it would make for transportation solutions in cities. You can just call your car at anywhere you are, it drives you to work, it drives away, and what it does to the landscape of transportation in cities. And if the cities and the policymakers would not be sitting around the table together with the people that are using it and together with the technological companies that are generating these solutions, we might be facing disastrous consequences in cities, whether it's in infrastructure, in job markets, in the way we, in pollution and so on. So cities really have the prime seat to be able to help tackle and shape our cities and design a system that designs out waste and creates system solutions that are serving the people who live in cities.
And that's one of the things you were starting with the Circular Cities Network. Maybe you can share with us a little bit about the agreement you have with Google. Because of course there's a connection between circular cities and the technology that enables these kinds of innovations.
Absolutely. We recently published a paper together with Google that goes and explores how the technology of tracking assets, of mobile apps, of big data can help to enable solutions that are both resource efficient, resource effective, and create a better social value in cities.
Yeah. Great. And one of the things that came up in these past conversations today in the conference is the importance of going upstream to design. And one of the things you've mentioned before is the role of cities in focusing our attention on human-centered design. So who are we designing for? Do you want to just say briefly in terms of that aspect?
Yeah, I mean, the policymakers, urban policymakers especially, are the ones that are facing face-to-face with the people, and they are the ones to tackle all the challenges that are coming, and being able to focus on which solutions in the city will make the people's life better, if it's affordable housing, if it's food systems that are designed to recapture the nutrients and bring them back into the system, to the urban biological cycle system. If it's through mobility, if it's through fashion, if it's through any human need that is expressed in cities, how we can find a solution that is oriented in that, but also is economically viable and helps us deal with the resource challenge.
Thank you, Julia. So we're going to come to Pigeonhole now, and the top question is, which city do you consider the closest to being circular and why? Wayne.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the kind of leading cities, the ones that always get mentioned are, should I say this? I don't know if I should say this. You're not tweeting this, no one's tweeting this.
Oh no,
they?
everybody is, this is all in camera, no, okay.
You know, I guess Amsterdam, you know, always get mentioned, and rightly so. But Amsterdam, you know, has all of the things going for it. It's got a very progressive political representative. It's got really good officers, and it's small. So the best big city is clearly London, you know, global leader in this space. But we've got 8 million people in our city, so thank you.
So
thank you.
Julia, you work with such a diversity of cities, and two of the other questions that have come up on Pigeonhole is often we're hearing a lot from European cities, but you know, how are you finding the Canadian cities? And also, are there developing country cities that can teach us something? Because you're working with those as well.
Yes, so I think that the Canadian cities are, at least the Toronto and Vancouver, which are the cities that we work with, the level of discussion is definitely transitioning towards much more focused on upstream solution and the business innovation, and going away from the discussion of how do we recycle things into how do we empower the local business community to just not create waste and bring a multi-stakeholder collaboration to the table. And in terms of developing countries, not from the top of my mind, but I think that what's happening right now in China is potentially very interesting, especially what going forward with the built environment and the immense infrastructure they're going to have to build. Looking forward to how they're going to work on the circular economy is going to be very interesting.
Great, thanks, Julia. And now let's go over to our friends in Toronto, and we have a question from Toronto.
Hi there. So, in quickly growing cities such as Toronto and Vancouver, construction waste is a significant challenge, particularly from new developments. What are some ways that construction waste can be, or opportunities for construction waste to be brought into the circular economy?
Great, thank you. So, what do you think? Wayne, let's go to you. Construction waste.
Yeah, we've got, so within we've produced a circular economy route map, and within that route map, we have a number of sectors, and one of the sectors that we look at is built environment, you know, across the piece really, from demolition and construction to use and after use. And the one thing I would say about my view on the building sector is it's really a really good case study of a linear system. So you have somebody who comes along and demolishes and builds, who hands it over to an operator who operates that building, and then the building gets handed over to somebody else who demolishes it, and then the whole cycle starts again. So you know, and that's not going to change actually, I don't think, unless and until those businesses integrate vertically. So in the absence of that, I don't often say you need regulation, to be honest, but in this instance I think regulation is really important, especially planning regulation. So pre-demolition audits, all that kind of stuff, you know, finding what you can reuse before you knock it down, before you destroy the material. One instance where there's been a real success, in my view, is a development in London around the Old Oak and Park Royal industrial estate, which is the biggest industrial estate in Europe. And we had a session a couple of years ago actually with the MACARTHUR Foundation at a workshop, and that has actually produced in their local planning document the requirement for every major development to produce and submit a circular and sharing economy statement that addresses, amongst other things, how the building will reuse material, how the building will be designed for disassembly, so, you know, trying to avoid the problem in future, how leasing will be enabled within the development, and how waste and water infrastructure will be dealt with. So that's a massive improvement in previous planning policy, and as I understand it, that's going to be introduced into London plan policy, which means every major development in London will have to produce, or developer will have to produce, a circular economy statement detailing how they're going to address those issues. Now, that's just, for me, that's mind-blowing, coming from a situation where really that wasn't dealt with at all in early developments in London. So I know that's not necessarily the answer, but it's, to me, having those circular economy principles kind of mainstreamed and baked into the planning development system, that makes a lot of difference.
Yeah, and I think this gets to, some of the questions are really about regulation and the role of local government in this. And one question is about harmonization. Are you able to harmonize across the London boroughs? Are you able to do that aspect?
No one's tweeting this, are they?
No, no.
So the London boroughs, I mean, we say at LWOB that harmonisation would be a good thing. Personally, I think it's a good thing. But it's incredibly difficult to do in practice because of the number of players there are in London, the different contractual arrangements, and they're all, you know, tied into their own particular systems. The thing is, you'll often hear local authorities say, this system has been designed and developed to meet the needs of my local population. A certain amount of truth in that, but quite often these systems have kind of evolved and haven't really, you know, they haven't really sort of stood back and said, well, maybe we should do what our neighbour does.
Yeah.
So in London you get the ridiculous situation where on one side of the street they'll have a completely different refuse collection and recycling system from the other side of the street, and also the other side of the street's waste might go to Bristol, whereas the other side of the street's waste goes to our Edmonton in London for incineration. So even it's just a ridiculous. I am in favour of harmonisation.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Don't tweet that.
Julia, you had your last slide, which was about local governments and the role they can play. And one of the questions you see at the bottom there is, to what extent can regulation and policy be flexible enough to allow innovative change, but also be strict enough to be enforcing? And, you know, what is the role of local government also in terms of connecting this to the smart city? Because you have both of those aspects on your slide. So maybe we can bring up the last slide from Julia on the screen. Do you want to speak for a moment about local governments?
Yeah.
And the role they play? or role of governments generally, public agencies?
Yeah, I mean, governments have a major role to play in the transition, as mentioned by Wayne. There is a difference between local governments and national governments, and I think it plays out differently whether we are in Canada, in US, or in Europe. But as a whole, the local governments are the ones that facing the challenges every day and are able to identify the solutions that are tailored for the local context of the city, rather than instead of the national government that is trying to make more fiscal and regulation solutions. But when we talk about local governments, I think that the major power of local governments is to bring the key actors and to empower them for action. And it starts with raising awareness and information, and I think that what London is doing with their business engagement scheme is very interesting and powerful. Through providing a neutral collaboration platform, there's cities around Europe, for example, like Peterborough, they have online platform for every business in the city to go register which assets they have, what they can share, and it's really just facilitating this environment for businesses to start working together. And when we look on the power of the public procurements, about how to enable business innovation and resource innovation to scale up fast to provide this initial market that is needed, what's happening now in Copenhagen or in Amsterdam around these issues is really interesting as well, and I encourage to take a closer look at that. So I think that the local government can really identify what are the right needs to the city and bring the key actors and enable them for action.
Great, thank you, Julia. We'll go back to Pigeonhole now, because I see that storytelling is on the slide here. When we go to Pigeonhole, you can see that the top question here is about people's perspective, about what a good life is. It's the kind of consumer demand citizen part of this equation. And in circular cities, when we have many, for example, young Canadians growing up wanting to live in a large house, land and cars, how do you start to shift that mindset? And by the way, this links to other questions that we have on our Pigeonhole. People moving from rural populations moving into cities, also expecting the quality of life. Wayne, you spoke to that. So do you have something to say about that aspect of the circular city, the mindset shift?
Yeah, I mean, well, for a start, my anecdotal view on this is that we are moving increasingly from wanting to own stuff to being happy to have access to the use of stuff. We're moving, certainly my daughter is, from being consumers of stuff to users of stuff. And that's fundamental. Mm-hmm. That's a fundamental shift. That allows us, I think, to still grow economically without being materially wasteful. So, as an example of that, my daughter, I just bought her an iPod Touch. Oh my goodness. It took me years to develop my really dodgy 1980s goth collection of LPs, which I sold like that. She's now got the history of music at her fingertips because she has access to the service. She hasn't got any records or CDs or DVDs. Mm-hmm. So that's a shift, from consume to use. So I don't necessarily accept the premise that we need to reduce our use of stuff. What we do need to do is measure the movement from consumption to use, and that will enable us to continue to grow economically and have access to the products and services or maybe the services that we desire.
Yeah, and I'm about to go back to Toronto for the next question, but before I do, Wayne, you were talking to me earlier about how cities or circular cities, often when they focus on waste prevention, they focus on information campaigns focused at cities. But then you told me something really interesting, that waste prevention and information campaigns is often what people think about, but where does your mind go when you think of waste prevention and circular cities?
Yeah, I mean, we had a piece of work done for us by Arup, and I wanted to ask the question, what could the circular economy do in terms of waste prevention? And the report's on our website if you want to check it out, and they looked at a number of common circular economy initiatives and tried to calculate what effect that would have on waste production. And they said that by 2041, if these initiatives were, had reasonable uptake, there'd be 60% reduction of waste in London, 60% of 10 million tons. Now that was kind of a fairly punchy number, but the point is that quite often when people talk to me about wanting waste minimisation campaigns, the only really effective waste minimisation campaigns that I've ever seen are food waste related, and everything else is just really, really difficult to get people to change their behaviour, to consume less.
Yeah, I like that connection you're making. Of course, there's consumer-focused campaigning, but waste prevention also happens at this business model level that you can then incentivize.
And everybody here today has talked about design. But it's no good saying, we need to design things better if there's no incentive built into the business model to do that. Whereas if we utilize these business models and support these business models, then they're designed because the incentives are shifted. So a service type business model, the incentive is on the business to design stuff so it can be easy to disassemble so they can resell it or release it out again.
Yeah.
And that's how it works, in my view.
Well, and this, Julia, I'm going to ask you the question that is coming from Toronto. It's about the cost of living is increasing, and these kind of service models and sharing of products seems to be this great way of getting at affordability in cities. But how do we get them from this niche to a larger market?
Well, I think that the key solution for that is that necessity requires new ways of acting, and I think that once more people are moving into cities, and it's already happening in major urban centers, when you cannot afford to live in an apartment in the city downtown, or when you cannot afford to rent a nice office by yourself, you start thinking, how can I view this asset differently, and how can I maybe share it, or maybe I don't need to have a washing machine. It's fine for me to share it with 10 other people, which saves me a hell lot of money and makes a lot of sense from a resource question. So I think that it's just necessity is going to push us towards there, and education is important, but it's the economic viability and the comfort of the solution that is going to make the shift.
Yeah, and any other thing to add? There's a second question very related. What strategies can involve citizens in a circular city incentives programs? What have you seen in London?
Well, look, the whole point of this is that we're reacting to other stuff happening. We're not leading the charge here, we're reacting. We're reacting to business leading, and we're reacting to citizens leading. So citizens have decided, because they can access sharing platforms easily, like, dare I say it, Uber and Airbnb and the like, that the sharing economy is really central and important to them. Citizens have decided to lease cars rather than buy them. Citizens have decided to use Kindle rather than buy a book. So I'm not sure what I need to do here, apart from really focus on those business models that citizens are demanding, because they're the ones that are going to lead the circular economy. So I'm not saying that we don't need to educate. I'm not saying that at all, but I am saying, actually, there's something happening here which has got its own momentum that is not led by us. We're rushing to catch up.
Yeah, great. Julia, we'll come to Julia and then to Wayne. Just final reflections. When we're thinking about circular cities, what should we keep in mind?
Wow, I think that when we talk about circular economy and cities, I think that we need to understand that cities are a major player around the table, and that no change can be done by just one actor. I think that it's crucial to be there together with businesses, with local, with governmental policymakers, with academia, with innovators, and with the citizens to really have a system change. And if we're looking to change the economy, then focus on where the center of action is a good place to start.
Great. And I just want to say also that both Ellen MacArthur Foundation and the London Waste and Recycling Board have excellent resources, including a toolkit that you're developing about what they've learned in London and what might be relevant to other cities. Wayne, what should we keep in mind when we think of circular cities?
Okay, two quotes. None of them are mine, so you can tweet these. Just don't ascribe them to me. 2 quotes. Nations talk and cities act. And the pace of change has never been so fast. and it will never be, no, the pace of change has never been so fast, and it will never be so slow again.
Ah, yes. Well, I'd like you all to join me in thanking Julia and Wayne on Circular Cities.